See if I can actually do this now. Here we go. Hi, everybody. As Leah said, I'm Emma. I am a Brit living in Singapore. And yeah, this is my third presentation for the Nomadic Network. I've done one on Singapore, and I also did one on Namibia with Epic 7 Travel, Marilena from there. And I liked it so much that I offered to come back and do another one on expat life. And I'm so happy to see so many people here. It's really exciting to see that the pandemic really hasn't diminished people's interest in living and working abroad, which is something that I'm super passionate about. I just thought I'd give you a bit of an introduction about me. I'm a travel addict. I'm a writer. I do freelance writing, and I also, like as Leah said, I have my own blog. I am a public speaker. I'm a mum. I'm passionate about sustainable travel. I'm passionate about family travel. I'm also very passionate about expat life and supporting expat families and women in particular into making their expat lives as good as they can to get the very, very most out of it. I'm also, in addition to being a presenter on TNN, I'm also the chapter leader for Singapore, and I host all the Pan Asia happy hours. So for most of you, they're at a really awkward time because we have them at 8 p.m. our time. But if any of you can jump on, we're always happy to talk all things Asia. I thought I would just put a few pictures up of our crazy expat life. I've lived in, I'm going to say 10 countries, I think. Sorry, 10 cities and 6 countries. And I'll get onto that in a bit of where I've actually lived and when. We travel. I've traveled my whole life, but I have traveled a lot with my kids, which a lot of people don't also think is a very good idea, but I love it, and it's definitely enriched the relationship between me and my kids. And I'm an expat, so I've been an expat for about a third of my life, I guess. And I actually dropped this slide in. I had this slide in already, but I tweaked it yesterday based off a conversation that I was having with somebody on, I forget if it was the Nomadic Network or Nomadic Matt's Facebook page, because they were promoting this, and somebody talked to me about using the word expat. So I just wanted to get into a little bit about what an expat actually is. The dictionary definition is a person who lives outside their native country. So that could really be quite any number of people. And it could also be, you know, that covers people who have gone to live somewhere for 3 months, and it includes people who have completely emigrated and are now permanently living somewhere outside of their native country. So it's a really broad definition. Personally, I tend to think of expats as more transient. I think of immigrants as people who have actually gone to live somewhere permanently. People have different other definitions about it. Sometimes they discuss it in terms of you're only an expat if you are sent on an expat package, and that you're not an expat if you have sort of signed on as a local hire. So those can also differentiate the definition. There's a lot of questioning in the expat community at the moment about whether or not we should even be using the word expat. There's a lot of debate about the word, about its origins, how it's very white privilege, it's very colonial, and it's not really the best word to use for what we are anymore. So I guess the best way that I try to describe myself now is, rather than saying that I'm an expat, I just say that I live in Singapore, or I love international living. So that's kind of where I am at the moment, and that was based off the conversation, like I said, that I had with somebody just yesterday. The other thing about expat is there's an awful lot of stereotypes about what we are, who we are, what we do, and I'll get into a little bit of that, particularly for women who follow their husbands' jobs. That tends to be There's quite a lot of misconceptions about what we do. You'll actually find that the women who are people like me who have had to reinvent themselves and find new careers to follow their globally mobile husbands, and wives as well. You know, it works both ways, but there's a huge demographic of very intelligent, highly educated women who travel the world and live internationally, and then find themselves in a country where they just can't work. And that is quite an interesting dynamic, I guess. And historically, they haven't been able to work, and they've been kind of classed as their tennis playing, drinking gin at 10 in the morning type of people. And I can assure you that's not the case, but not always anyway. I don't play tennis. So these are some more pictures of us and our international life. The reason why I've dropped all the pictures in, by the way, is because the last two presentations that I did, it was all about Singapore and Namibia, and I had all the photos. It looked really, really cool. And then I started doing this presentation. I was like, I need to jazz this up a bit with some more photos. So yeah, my international life, I've moved over 25 times. I've lived in 10 cities, 6 countries, and 5 continents. Spent over a third of my life outside of the UK, and I've done that as a child. I did it as a young adult. I did it as a young professional when I was single. I've done it married. I had a child in Houston. So I've got one kid from Houston and one kid from London. And we also acquired a dog in Houston. He's now moved from Houston to London, from London to Doha, and then from Doha to Singapore. And I can assure you the hardest part of any move is moving a dog. It's by far the most stressful thing that I ever have to do, bless him. And he hates flying, which is just tragic for him. So international life, and you'll see that I have changed all of the words now too. It's not really an expat thing. It's just international life. There's lots of different things. There's lots of different types of ways to live internationally. You can be with a multinational company, and they can move you abroad on an international assignment, and that can be either as a local hire or on a package. You can also do it with international recruiters. So it's a very similar process, but you're recruited obviously from the country rather than being sent to the country. You can just be in the country and find a local package there. And you can be a digital nomad. And there's lots of other different types of people who live internationally, but those are the main ones. Generally, I say generally, in my adult life, I've really only moved with the multinational company situation. Sometimes it was my job, and lately it's been my husband's job that has sent us to all these exciting locations. Things that you want to consider if you're looking to move internationally is, I mean, there's so many things, but the first thing is just to not just to look at the base salary. There's a lot of hidden costs that we've found when we've moved to different countries, including the cost of living, the cost of healthcare, whether or not you get a pension included in that, what the taxes are like, other expenses that you wouldn't normally incur. So we spend an incredible amount of money. We used to spend an incredible amount of money trying to get ourselves home, particularly when we lived in Qatar. The flights were really, really expensive. Obviously, we haven't spent that money for some time now, but it's always something that you need to keep in mind, if that's an allowance that you're given, or if you need to factor that into the base salary. Things like cost of food, cost of transport, all of those things are things that you really need to look at. There's websites that will do comparisons for you. And you can also, I would always recommend reaching out to people in the location that you're aiming to go to, just so that you can really get an idea for what maybe somebody's monthly shopping bill might be like, or what the schools are like, because those are the sorts of things that really can affect how you enjoy a location if you suddenly arrive and things aren't really quite as you expected. There's a lot of other things I would say that you need to consider before deciding to make an international move. If you even know anything about the location, is that's always helpful. If you've been there, even better. Or if you know people who have been there, that's also even better. Every location that we've been to, we've moved sight unseen. So that's always trickier, I would say. But we've usually known people who are going to be there, or who have lived there, or who are living there, that we could reach out to, and we could really get a feel for how life is on the ground. You might want to consider climate. If you're a hot weather person, don't go, don't move to Alaska, don't move to Canada. Um, don't move to the Scandinavian countries. But if you love the snow, then maybe consider moving to, I don't know, the French Alps or something. So those sorts of things are always important to think about. You do need to think about, if you've got kids, you need to think about healthcare and education. I mean, you need to think about healthcare anyway, but healthcare for us has become much more important as we've had children. We now will really consider seriously if we will move to a country with malaria, for example, or a country where you would have to be medevaced out if there was a serious illness or injury. There's a few countries that you may or may not want to go to because they're super dangerous, or because the government is not, by Western standards, ethically playing by the rules. Those things really depend on your tolerance and your understanding of a country before you go, but also when you do the research. So don't just rely on the stereotypes, and make sure you do that research properly first. You might want to consider, if you're taking dependents with you, and how they're going to work. So for example, it's incredibly difficult for me to work here in Singapore. It's not impossible, but it's just, there's a lot of loopholes that we have to go through to even be able to find me a job, much less a visa. So those are things that, if that's going to be a problem in a couple's dynamic, that you should really consider. You need to consider things like travel. Obviously not so much now, but one of the things that very much attracted us to moving to Houston and Doha and here in Singapore is that they're all travel hubs. And so we were very easily able to get to almost anywhere in the region very quickly and relatively cheaply, to really discover more about the region and the culture, and to get out and about. So for us, being in a place where we can travel easily, pandemic notwithstanding, is always hugely important for us. And like I say, you do have to consider things like evacuation options. We were unlucky enough to be in the Middle East when a blockade started between Saudi Arabia and, many of the Middle Eastern countries and Qatar. And for a week there, we were pretty nervous and wondering if we were going to have to leave. And so you do always need to know what your exit strategy is. And the other thing, I guess, for me personally, is to always try and move somewhere where there's a really good community. It doesn't have to be an expat community necessarily, but you do need to know how you're going to be able to socialize. For me, living abroad is all about getting to know people. It's all about understanding the local cultures and customs, and it's all, you can't do that without meeting the people on the ground. So that's hugely important for me. Now I've put this as the good, the bad, and the top tips, but I'm actually going to start with the bad. And the only reason for that is because I never like leaving on a negative. So I'm going to start with all the bad stuff and then tell you why actually you really, really do want to come and live a fun international life. The thing for me has always been that I think people have these ideas that international life is easy, international life is fun, it's everybody earns loads of money because they've been moved abroad, or and it's just this sort of life in the sun. And I know that if any of you follow me on Instagram or on Facebook, my feed is always, I try to keep it strictly travel, but it's always nice pictures and sunny skies and smiling faces, and that's for everybody, right? But it's especially true with international life. And I know even my friends at home don't understand just how hard it really, really can be at times. Culture shock is a huge thing. It's hard when you arrive in a country, but actually I quite often have culture shock whenever we return to a country. And then I get reverse culture shock as well when I go home, or to the States, or to somewhere that I really know and that I feel that I should belong. I actually end up feeling that I don't belong there, because the thing with expat life is it completely changes you, and it doesn't change the people that you've left behind, or the places that you've left behind, and that can be a really, really tricky thing to reconcile with you and your family and the people that you love. As I mentioned before, there's misconceptions and stereotypes about people. So I had a lady that I met in Qatar, and she said, "Oh, so are you here? Are you here working, or are you a lady of leisure?" And I was like, "Whoa, okay." So, she obviously had her ideas about who I was, and what I was doing there. But it was this idea that I was just flitting about doing not very much, was actually really quite insulting to me, and we ended up getting into a huge debate about what I really was doing there. The other thing is that you feel homesick a lot, all the time, and then you feel homesick for places that you used to live. So now I feel homesick for Houston, I feel homesick for London, I feel homesick for Ecuador, where I lived when I was 18. I feel homesick for a lot of places and people, and that just never goes away. And the more places you live, the harder and harder that gets. And that can make it quite lonely, to be honest. Especially when you don't really belong. I don't belong here in Singapore. I didn't belong in Qatar. I'm not American. I don't really consider that I belong in London. And those are really hard things to become okay with, I guess. And you have to be pretty strong to know that's just part of your identity, and that's okay. What else? Moving logistics. When you move, oh my goodness, it is crazy. And you never really think, moving even across town is a crazy logistical nightmare. But when you're thinking about putting everything that you own into a shipping container and moving it halfway across the world, and you're tracking your little ship as it goes, and you're finding out where it is in customs, and hoping that it doesn't hit customs in the middle of Ramadan in the Middle East, because that means that it'll take even longer to clear customs. And then you unpack it at the other end, and you realize that the movers, who are not allowed to put anything in the trash, have actually packed a trash can full of trash, or your favorite lamp has been broken, or something's gone missing in the move. That there's all kinds of stories that we have. I showed up in Singapore and realized all our bed sheets had gone missing. So we had all the pillows and all the beds and all the mattresses and everything, but no bed sheets. And all the things on our fridge had all of those, but none of the fridge magnets. And I still don't know where they are. So the thing about moving, and the logistics of moving, though, is that you also have an incredible amount to do just from a paperwork perspective. You usually have to close down all your phone accounts, or your TV, electricity, water. You have to cancel your visas. You usually have to prove that you've paid all the tax that you need to pay before you leave a country. And so that's just extra layers of stuff that you really don't need to be doing when you're trying to pack up your whole life and move. I think I've covered most of the other things on here, apart from raising a third culture family, which is actually my next slide. So raising third culture kids, which is a big thing in the international community as well, is that's incredibly difficult, because basically my children don't have the same upbringing that I had. Couldn't be further from it, to be honest. I grew up in this beautiful town, quite small, in Devon, in the southwest of England, and I could never have imagined the life that they lead. They're so lucky, they've got no idea. But they also have their own issues, moving with kids, like if they're big or little, or even if they're grown up, that really changes the dynamic of how anybody moves, and the decisions that you make about where you're going to go, and how long you want to be there. You have to think about things like education. You have to think, as I said, about things like healthcare. And you have to think about their social life. You really have to think about how they transition, if this is going to be a good move for them, what the community is like for them, how easy they find it to make friends. Um, it's a lot to think about, and it's tricky for them because, and I think I'm my kids are only 9 and almost 7, so they're really only coming into this thing, but. Um, I think belonging for children is a huge thing, and if they're lucky enough to be in an international school, then um, they can really benefit from the international environment. But those schools are also incredibly competitive and incredibly um, transient, and so you have a lot of people coming in and out. So even if they're not moving, a lot of the time their friends are moving, and those are huge considerations for us and for all families who live internationally. Um, But then the best bits, because I love the best bits about international life. The best thing is travel, and it will come back. And I'm basically marooned on Singapore. We're not really able to leave. Some people can come in and out, but we haven't left since January last year. And currently, if I went back to the UK is on Singapore's red list, so I would not be able to get back in. But they're talking about travel corridors here, and they're talking about a digital passport, and I'm very excited and very heartened to think that we might be getting in and out, and so that people can come and see us again too. It's a totally different life, and it really, one of the things for us was I'd spent 7 years in London, and I really couldn't remember what year certain things were happening in, like when you're at school and you hear a song and you go, oh, I was in this grade, or when you're at college and you have some food, or you have a memory and you know exactly when it was and who you were with and where you were living, and I just lost that because this 7 years of my first sort of early professional life had just merged into itself, and it's so cool now because I can pinpoint certain events in my life, and certain things that I was listening to, or foods that I was eating, or places that I was going, and I know where I was, I know what I was doing, I know who I was with because of those times in my life. Professional development's another thing. Like, there's certain things that we could not have done had we not lived in the places that we've lived. You get a certain amount of experience in specific places. So, if you move to Qatar, you might be in energy, or you might be in construction, or you might be in healthcare. You move to Singapore, you might be in education, you might be in financial services. And there's definitely a career progression that a lot of our friends have seen that their colleagues have not, because they've not been prepared to move. You get all these amazing new experiences. It's so cool to look out of the window. I just pinch myself all the time, and I always have done, like, oh my goodness, I live in America. Oh my goodness, I live in South America. Oh my goodness, I live in Southeast Asia. Like, it's just so cool. And you realize that you're just living this life that nobody else really understands. The flip side of not having, losing your identity and having to reinvent yourself is that you lose your identity and you get to reinvent yourself, and you get to be whatever you want to be, and you can choose a new career, and you can retrain, and you can do all of these things that really, when you so I think sometimes when we live at home and we are constrained by the boxes that we put around ourselves, our family and friends have put around us, that society has put around us, and moving away is just this amazing way of just changing those rules and changing the playbook. It's amazing. You get great stories. I've always got war stories of places that we've been, or places that we've been living. Who else can say that they've lived through a blockade in the Middle East or a pandemic in Southeast Asia? It's super cool, and it's always really fun to share those experiences. And I was talking to a friend just yesterday, and she said she's living in Australia now, and she's Australian. She lives in a kind of small town. And she said, nobody's interested, nobody cares. And then I was talking to this guy at a barbecue, and he was suddenly asking us about what we were doing. And it turns out that he was living in Saudi at the same time that she and I were living in Doha. And they just had this amazing connection and conversation because they could both totally relate to how it felt. And you just meet these people all over the world who can suddenly connect with you purely because of your shared experiences. We're much closer as a family too because of the shared experiences. You know, we've really learned that we can only live with each other. You know, with all each other has, and it's definitely brought us much closer. It was one of the best things that we've ever done for our family. I love learning, so there's just so much to learn. You can learn about all the culture and the religion and the history and the politics and food, because I love food. I've been very happy exploring all of the different cuisines that we get here in Singapore. In the Middle East, it was just fabulous to be able to go down to the souk and eat hummus and mutbal, and it's all just so amazing. And then when I lived in Houston, obviously Texas barbecue, can't beat it, and some Tex-Mex as well. And it just broadens your horizons. You know, it exposes you to people who are not the same as you, who are not what you are normally like. When we lived in London, we've got lots of friends in London. We're very lucky, and we basically really only socialize with the people that we already knew. And when you move somewhere else, you have to make new friends. You have to go and find those experiences, find those people, and you will find that the international or expat network is so supportive. It's so helpful. Everybody's there for you. You know, people. I had to fly home for a family emergency from Doha. People were showing up on the doorstep. They were leaving my family food. They were inviting the kids over for play dates. They were picking my kids up from school, all just so that they knew that I didn't have to worry about it. And that community has really stuck with me. That, like, it's the same here in Singapore. And I've now got friends all over the world who I know that I can count on for pretty much anything, because that everybody knows what it's like to be so far away from your network and your family, and they step up, and it's really, really amazing. So my top tips for living an amazing international life. The first thing is mindset. I can't guarantee that wherever you move, you'll have an amazing time. That nobody can guarantee that. I can't guarantee if you stay where you are, you'll have an amazing time either. But I can guarantee that you'll have a bad time. If you go with the wrong mindset, you will have a bad time. You will not enjoy yourself. And people will know you. Okay, it's super obvious when I've met people who haven't gone with an open mind, who haven't gone wanting to embrace the life that they're going to have. It was obvious, and I could spot them a mile away. It's just, it really is what you make of it, and if you go with the right mindset, it can completely change your outlook on where you're moving. Take photos of everything and journal and write stuff down. I can't tell you how much that I wish that I had photos of all these places that we've been or lived, and I just don't have those memories. And it's really silly things like the car that we had, or my kitchen in Houston, or I don't know, the street that I lived on when I lived in Ecuador. I wish that I had those photos. I wish that I had those memories, because your mind will fail you and you will forget those places. And it's just so nice to be able to look back and see those things. You know, when we lived in Qatar, that was one of the first things that I did, was I was just taking pictures everywhere. And I'm so very grateful that I can look and I can remember the street parties that we had, and you know, my kids, the street that my kids learned to ride bikes on and things like that. It's all it's just lovely to have those memories. I would always say make it home immediately. It's the first thing I do. Is I do a massive unpack. I don't leave the boxes lying around. I don't leave the pictures from sitting on the floor. Put those pictures up, make it feel yours. The more you feel that, the less it feels like yours, the more you'll feel in limbo, the more transient you'll feel, and the less you'll feel at home. I mean, it just stands to reason. And it's really the little things, you know, like putting rugs down or having the familiar cushions on the sofa. It's not the big stuff, but the little stuff really makes a massive difference to make it feel like yourself. Say yes to everything. Just jump in with both feet, immerse yourself, get into the community, find something that you love doing. I joined a choir when I first moved to Singapore, and it was the best thing I ever did. I was immediately embraced by all these amazing women who are so supportive. and we sing together, but we're so much more as well. When I was in Qatar, I was working for a professional women's network. I was very highly involved in welcoming new people to our compound where we lived. I was highly involved in the school, and it's all about meeting people and just getting involved, getting into the community, understanding the way of life. And you'll never regret it. Just sitting at home is so easy. And it's such a scary thing to do when you just got to walk into that coffee morning or to that choir rehearsal and you don't know anyone and you feel a bit sick and you think, I just don't want to do this. I don't want to make the small talk that you always have to make before you can really get to know people, but it's so worth it. It really is so worth it. And those people will be there for you, and it will become your life. It's amazing. But that being said, I would also say no. Don't oversubscribe yourself. Like, I think at the beginning that's always a good thing, but you can spread yourself too thin. You can end up doing too much. You can also end up in situations where you're surrounded by negative people, which is, I've also got as a point on here, negative people will drag you down. And they, that's the same wherever you live. People with the wrong mindset are just, they're not going to be the people that you need to surround yourself with, and you need to know when to say no and when to have boundaries for people in situations like that, because it really will change how you experience a place. Please go with an open mind. Do your research by all means. Find out what the people have to say. Read the news. Read a wide variety of news, because not everybody reports places in the same ways. But go with an open mind. You just don't know what you're going to arrive to. I had so many preconceived ideas about all the places that I've been, and Singapore was probably the first place where I really felt that I needed to come and learn for myself about how it is, what people do, how people think, and I'm so glad that I have. It's really changed the way that I've experienced the country, and I've been able to form my own opinions about it, which is probably the first time that I've genuinely been able to do that. Get to know the locals. Don't just stay in the international community. It's easier said than done in some places. I did find it really, really difficult in the Middle East to meet local people, particularly because I wasn't working. So my sphere of exposure just wasn't really there. But I'm so grateful for the local friends that I've got here who have really helped me understand our country a lot better. And probably a life lesson, but listen more than you speak. Just don't take it all in. Be open to the new experiences and to learning. And I guess that's probably it.
Emma, I actually got emotional like listening to your presentation. And the chat was on fire with a lot of great questions, with people's experiences, kind of adding on to your stories. And I just can't imagine that you could pack so many stages and countries and phases of your life within 30-40 minutes. So it's always a joy having you on and listening to. You could literally come back every week and keep telling us more.
Happy to.
We have quite a few questions, so let's start off with this one. Esther wanted to know, what are some of the websites that allow us to compare costs, or what have you used in the past to compare costs between countries and cities, etc.?
Oh gosh, that is a good question. I would have to come back to that, and I'm happy to put that in there. We usually send a follow-up email from TNN, so I'm happy to put that in there. If you research cost of living comparison sites, I think it's like the top 2 or 3 are usually pretty good.
All right, perfect. Yeah. So everyone, if you, we do send a follow-up email, so just look out for that. We'll include it in the follow-up email. I'm still grabbing the questions. So actually this one's for myself. Which country or city was the hardest for you to assimilate or adjust to?
Oh, It would either be Doha or Singapore, I would say. Doha was an interesting one because it coincided with me really saying goodbye to my professional career. I refer to myself as a recovering corporate insurance broker. So I got out of the corporate life, but that was really the first time that um, that had happened. And I had two small children. So I was going through this huge identity crisis. We'd moved from London, um, so it was back on the expat trail, and I'd given up my job, and I was a new mum, and I was in this brand new country which I really didn't understand. And the roads kept changing, and they dig roads up and reconstruct roads in Doha like you wouldn't believe. Like you'd literally just drive along one day and there's like a brand new road, and suddenly you're going off over there and you're like, what? I don't know where I am. So thank goodness for sat nav. So I found Doha incredibly difficult from that perspective. But the thing with Doha was that we all lived on a compound. Everybody from our company lived on the same compound, and they all knew that we were coming. And so, people showed up immediately with meals and cookies and wine, and it was just staggering how welcome we were made to feel. And then we moved here, and I really missed having that kind of really tight-knit community. And the tight-knit community can work both ways. It gets a bit like you're living in a goldfish bowl at times, but when you're used to that, that's all you've got. And and when you can just kick your kids out onto the street and they ride their bikes, and because nobody's driving in that compound unless they live there, and there's a speed limit of like 10k an hour or something, and we didn't even live on a through street, so the kids would just ride their bikes, and their best friends lived like on 5 doors down and on the next street, and they just run around to each other's houses. And it was a life that they really couldn't ever have had anywhere else. I mean, I don't remember being able to do that when I was 4, and that was maybe 40 years ago. So I think moving to Singapore, it was just a big shock that suddenly the kids were riding the bus to school and I couldn't go. I didn't go into school as much, whereas in Doha I was in school every day, dropping them off and picking them up, and I just had that sort of personal contact with the school. I really did have to go looking for my community, and I was so fortunate that I found this choir so quickly. So yeah, I think it took a lot more work to find my community here in Singapore, but I had less going on myself, so that did help.
Okay. Yeah, this sounds like two very different experiences, but I'd love to know if there was ever a point in Doha and in Singapore. Like, when was that point when you were like, okay, this is another home for me? Like, I feel settled, I feel good.
I would say every international move takes 6 to 12 months, always. And I used to gauge it by when you come home and you get off from a trip and you get off a plane, and then you're going home. And for the first couple of trips, whenever you live somewhere new, the first couple of times you come home, it's not automatic. You still have to put the sat nav, the GPS on to get you home or from the airport, because you've not been there that many times, and you walk through the door and it's not that kind of like, oh, I'm home feeling. And so I've always gauged it on that. So it probably was 6 months to a year, I would say, in Doha. Singapore, obviously I didn't have that gauge, because we locked down so quickly. I mean, we only moved here in August 2019, so I guess it was 6 months before the pandemic started, at least in Asia. So yeah, that's a good question. I don't know really when I did turn around and say this is home. It would still probably have been a year, I would think.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think you're right about Singapore being different to gauge because of everything that's been going on. So it's just been a different life.
Yeah, well, it's a funny place, Singapore, because I was so excited to come, and now, and I don't get me wrong, I love living here, and it's amazing, but I can't wait to leave, because we came to travel, and we never came with the expectation that we weren't going to be able to leave. So.
Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna kind of skip here to Abigail because they're asking questions related to what you just answered. So Abigail wants to know if you found it challenging being in the Middle East as a woman. Did you feel restrictive, or like you were pressured to, be, act, dress, talk a certain way because of those cultural differences?
Yes and no. So Qatar is actually a very it's one of the more liberal places to live as a woman. So I could drive, I could work. The Sheikha Moza, who is the current emir's mum, she's incredibly empowering, and she's and very vocal about women's rights and empowering women. And so that was always really inspirational to be in a country that was promoting that. That being said, it's still a very chauvinistic culture, and her attitudes did not pervade throughout all of the local families. And it's just, I mean, Doha's a strange place to live as well. I think the population is 2.7 million people in the whole country, so in Qatar, and 2.4 million of those are expats or international people.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, so there's only 300,000 locals, right? And so they become very protective of their culture and their society, rightly so. They don't really want it diluted by all these foreigners coming in. But I mean, the good side of that is that then, there is a big international community. So there were lots of women who were very supportive, and lots of ways to meet people, lots of ways to network, and people who would genuinely just go out of their way to help you. In terms of, I mean, the only real place that I felt sort of way that I felt restricted was my clothes. So I did have to cover my shoulders and my cleavage and my knees. And during Ramadan, we had to cover our ankles as well. And you could be asked to leave public spaces if you did that.
Oh, wow.
So that was pretty intense. But I mean, that was the only way that I changed myself. Now, if I'd been working there, I don't know how I would have felt. But
Right. Thank you for sharing that. Okay, I want to get into, Abigail says that's super helpful. Thank you. So there's a few questions about work here. Trang wants to know, for your experience with international recruiters, do they usually look for employees with very particular skills? For example, engineering, IT versus general admin. Trang's always wondering how some people get sponsored to work in other countries and what types of jobs they're offered.
So that really depends on the country. So, for example, I think I mentioned in Qatar, there's a huge construction and huge natural gas industry sectors. So if you're in those industry sectors, then definitely that's a place to go. In Singapore, it's more financial services. I'm just trying to think. I would say, I mean, generally, if you're very niche, then you're going to be more in demand, and less the generalists. There's just more people who can do those jobs. And what you will also find is in many countries, there are quotas. So you have to employ a certain number of local people versus a certain number of international hires. And so if you have that, it's much easier for them to find a local who can do a general job. But if you're, the world expert in drilling wells in a natural gas field, then, there's only so many people who can do that. So generally speaking, I guess the experts will probably be more in demand. But it's always worth really speaking to international recruiters and just finding out what they're looking for and the kinds of people that they're looking for. If you're interested in a specific country, then you can find that out. International recruiters are actually quite tricky to navigate around if you don't know where you want to go. I've found it's been better to talk to people who are in country and on the ground, and they know what they're talking about. So talking to somebody who works for an international recruitment consultancy in London, when you want to move to Singapore, is just not, you're better off going to the Singapore branch.
Yep, absolutely. And from personal experience, I worked in advertising in Australia, and they told me, and I got a job before I even stepped on a plane to fly there. And they told me they love people who've worked in advertising in Europe and the US, because as far as advertising, those two continents are like light years ahead of Australia. So they're like, we'll sponsor you in a heartbeat if you want to come out here. So it definitely, like you said, depends on your industry. As well. And that's a very particular, industry, like you said.
Yeah. It also depends, I think, on your network. So I'm interviewing for a job here that is actually for a company that I worked for 10 years ago. And I've stayed in touch with those people, and and I reached out to them and said, oh, look, I'm here and I'm in Singapore, and we had some chats, and then the pandemic hit and everything fell off a cliff. And then they called me out of the blue last week and said, will you come in for another interview? I mean, that's how it works. And that is where working for multinational, even though it's not my company that's moving us at the moment, it's working for a multinational is amazing, because you do have that network, and it does just kind of, you don't, I've got colleagues all over the world because I've done that as well. So
that's amazing. Good luck to you. That's really exciting. And
Thank you.
I'm a firm believer in your network is your net worth. So good
job.
Yes. Okay, so I have another question here from iPad 152. I'm so sorry. I wish we had your name, but that's what the name is, iPad 152. Would you say that the internet has been a game changer to help international life, or on the contrary, there's like too much information, or it's too saturated, or there's too many horror stories?
No, I think mostly it's a good thing. There are some horror stories, but to be honest, someone said to me the other day, or a while ago now, you'll always find what you're looking for on the internet. So depending on how you look for something, you're going to find it, So she's actually Jewish, and she moved to the Middle East, and so she was looking for things about Jewish people in the Middle East, and depending on how she worded the search, she was getting very different responses, So I think if you're looking for a positive story, then you'll find it, and if you're looking for a negative story, then you will find that too. The one thing that I would say is the internet, in terms of video calling, cheap text messaging, has completely changed the game for me. I just don't know if I could have done international life without that. I don't know how my mum and dad did it when we lived in the States when I was very little. My mum moved us to Australia when I was 10, and I just don't know how they did it, really. And even, when I moved to Ecuador, I was only 18. I used to bring my mum once a month, and now I speak to my mum every day, like sometimes multiple times a day, and we message all the time, and it's just the connection. I don't know how we would have done it, to be honest, particularly in the pandemic, but even before. So on the whole, I think the internet for expats is a wonderful thing.
Absolutely. I believe in, comparing and contrasting, like comparing different sites, cross-referencing. That's the word I'm looking for, right?
Yeah.
I'm sure you've done so much of that.
I am a prolific researcher, so
yes.
But there is that. I can get really far down a rabbit hole of what we might, look into a location. We were looking at a possible move to China a few months ago, and suddenly I'm down like I know all the international schools, I know where everybody lives, I know how you get around. So yeah,
like you're already there.
Yeah.
Right. That question was from Francois from Montreal. So thank you, Francois.
Thank you.
No, that was cute. I was like, ooh, can you imagine if we're all iPad numbers, our names?
Yeah.
All right. So Nikki and both Lisa have a questions about language. How do you overcome any language barriers? And do you have any language app or program recommendations that have helped you in the past?
I'm going to come super clean and say I've been incredibly lazy for the last 2 moves. When I moved to South America, I already spoke some Spanish because I'd been studying it at school. Didn't speak it very well, and I do now. I'm fluent in Spanish, and I took Portuguese classes while I was there. So that was probably the last time that I heavily invested in the language side of things. The really interesting thing in the Middle East is that you don't really speak that much Arabic because there's so many international people there, and the Qataris, for example, don't drive your taxis and they don't work in the supermarket, and they work in the banks and they work in the government institutions, so that's where you come across them. But if I didn't need Arabic in my day-to-day life at all, and it's a huge regret of mine that we didn't pursue that more, but it really wasn't a necessity of day-to-day life. Here in Singapore, we swore that we were going to learn Mandarin, and we haven't. I have learned some, but mostly because my children, they have, and this is another amazing thing about international life and raising third culture kids, they have Mandarin class every single day at school. So they're just, and the stuff that they can say and that they understand is mind-blowing, because we're coming up for 2 years now of them doing an hour a day of Mandarin. So they've taught us quite a bit.
That's great.
Yeah, it's one of those things on my list. So I'm afraid I can't even recommend apps. A friend of mine did recommend she's using Duolingo to learn French, and then I've got another friend who's using a different app. But Rosetta Stone always used to be the one that I was always familiar with. But to be honest, when you're learning a language, the best way to learn is when you're in the country and just to completely immerse yourself. Learning it off an app is helpful, and it's really good to get the basics down before you move to a country, but there's no replacement for living there.
Yes, absolutely. That immersion, right, into the language. Do you ever do language meetups, or did you ever used to go to any language meetups that like bars or international, where they'd have people kind of from all cultures come and be like, I speak these languages, and everyone would try to...
Not so much as to a language meetup, but I seek out Spanish speakers wherever I can, and I usually try and find use my network, and reach out to my Ecuadorian friends and say, do you have any friends who live in Singapore, or I don't know. The amazing thing about speaking Spanish is that so many people do speak Spanish because there's so many countries that they speak Spanish in. So there's usually somebody that you can find who will listen to me prattle on. Try and keep my Spanish alive.
Yeah. No, that's great. I need to keep practicing. Language meetup is essentially, they're kind of like happy hours. They're usually based around happy hour time, and people from, Lisa was asking, every culture, wherever city you are, I used to go to them a lot in Buenos Aires, and you would like wear a flag of where your country is, what language you speak, and just mix and mingle with people. And it helps with immersion a bit. I found a lot of times the language would just switch to English automatically, just because sometimes, people's English in Argentina is probably better than my Spanish in Argentina. So but it's dependent on where you go. 2 apps that I do know of, Cambly, I'll drop them in the chat. Cambly and italki are apps that you can pay native speakers to speak with you for like 15 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour. And you pay X amount of dollars and just get that kind of like conversation where you can practice with people. So I know people that teach on those apps. That's why I know about those apps. So you guys can check those out as well. All right. So Emma, we got some language questions. Let's see. Oh, Lisa wants to know what breed of dog you have, and can you describe that process and experience of moving your dog?
Oh man, we're going to get into the war stories now. So he is a rescue. We picked him up in Houston. He's a retriever husky collie, we think, but we don't really know. He's completely nuts. So we moved him from Houston to London. We ended up having to leave him behind with our dog walker for a day because we couldn't get his paperwork done to get him onto our flight, which actually worked out better because it takes them much longer to clear customs. So I guess it took 4 to 6 hours after he landed for us to be able to go and get him. And we were there traveling with a not even 1-year-old, and I can't imagine hanging around Heathrow for 6 hours while we waited for a dog to clear. So actually that worked out all right. Then when we moved to Doha, oh, that was a nightmare. We didn't have very much time. One of the things about moving with a multinational company, depending on the company, is that you don't get very much time. So when we moved to Houston, we kind of knew the move was coming, but we had 10 days. And we packed up the house and moved out and sold the car, and I had to stay and finish up some work, and my husband was gone in 10 days. When we moved to the Middle East, I think we had a month from London, and it turned out that the dog's rabies vaccine was about to it was expiring like the week after we moved to Doha, I think, which is fine under Doha regulations, but I was just really anxious about it. So the rabies vaccine, generally speaking, you cannot import a dog within 30 days of them having, or any animal within 30 days of them having a vaccine, to almost anywhere. So I didn't want to vaccinate him because then I knew that the 30 days would be encroaching on our day of flight. So it was all fine, and we got all the permits issued. We got the exit permits from export permits from the UK, and we got the import permits from Doha, and we had it all done. We used, luckily we knew somebody in Doha who could help us with all of that stuff. And then we got to and I must have called the airline like 17 times to just double check, and every time I spoke to somebody I got something a little bit different, so I was really nervous. We got to the airport like 4 hours ahead of time, and they said that his paperwork wasn't right. So I'm there in the middle of an airport with like 12 suitcases and 2 small children and my whole life just there in the waiting line, and they go, yeah, your dog can't come with you. And I'm like, what is this? And then it turned out that the airplane, the temperature control in the cabin wasn't working. So they were like, well, he can't fly anyway because there's nobody in that part of the cabin. It's a very special pressurized part of the luggage of the hold. And they said, well, that's broken, so he can't fly anyway. So then we're like, and then they're like, well, what do you want to do? Do you want to move your flight? So I said, well, I don't want to move my flight if you're not going to let him onto the plane anyway. But if you are going to let him onto the plane, then sure, bump the flight. And so there's this huge rigmarole. We ended up like running for the plane. He did make it onto the flight. They sorted out the paperwork thing. And then it turned out that the temperature control was only in the main cabin and not in his part of the cabin. But I spent the entire flight just like, I hope, am I going to get this dog at the other end? And we also made sure that we flew on a specific day because they don't always process animals at the weekend. So all of that stuff you just have to kind of take into consideration, because you don't want an animal not being processed in heat in the Middle East. And we moved in May, so it was like 50 degrees, which is, I don't know, 120 Fahrenheit.
Oh my gosh.
And then when we moved to Singapore, we had the same problem again with the rabies. I'd kept everything up to date. I thought that was all fine, but they had extra requirements. It's incredibly difficult to get animals into Singapore. And he had to do a 30-day quarantine. But by the time I'd got all the paperwork in order to book him into quarantine, they didn't have space. So I ended up having to leave him with a friend for 6 weeks. And then I went back to get him.
Wow.
And that was the most stressful. I was having like anxiety attacks about the whole thing. So I was dealing with this awful woman in the Middle East who was just not, I don't know what she was doing, but it wasn't, I'm sure some of it wasn't legit. And then I was like, this isn't working. I just need to go and get my dog and get him into the country.
Oh my
yeah,
goodness.
it's definitely the most stressful thing. Or yeah, and that was the other funny thing, because people were like, "Oh, have you looked up schools and do you know where you're living?" And I was like, "No, I don't care about that. I don't care that we don't have a house. I don't care that my kids haven't got a place in school. My
Yeah,
dog
my
can't
dog.
come with me."
Yes. Oh man, yes, fellow dog lovers would agree, I think. Is this your dog right here above the O in questions?
Yeah, that's him. That's my
So
Bailey.
cute.
I
Oh
think there's
my
another picture. Let me find the other picture of him. There he is,
God. Oh, so beautiful.
my little desert dog.
Oh my gosh, I love that picture. I love that photo.
He's so cute.
Oh
He's totally
wow.
mad. So
Super.
yeah.
Thank you for all that info.
Oh, that's
That's
all right.
incredibly important.
Yeah. Not to put
Uh,
anybody off moving with animals.
yeah, yeah. So Ali has a really important question also. What is the best way to deal with homesickness while abroad for a long period of time?
You really have to listen to yourself and know what you need. Sometimes I need to, call my mum and have a good cry, or sometimes I need to just like cook some food that is, from that place, or and sometimes I just need to forget about it and I need to not wallow in it. And so I need to go out and keep myself busy, and go, I don't know, go make a new friend or go for a nice long walk. So it does really, really depend. Sorry?
Your spin classes. I love
Or do
seeing
my spin classes?
your spin classes. Yeah.
My spin instructor is also nuts. So and I drink a lot of tea. That keeps me connected.
That's great.
Too.
Yeah.
But yeah, it really depends. Everybody's so different. I do think you can get kind of caught up in wallowing, which is never helpful for anyone. But you can't ignore the feelings either. So it's hard.
Have you found any in Singapore? I know things are, half closed right now, restrictions type of whatnot because of COVID, but have you found any food or restaurants or spots or parks, nature that remind you of home that you can always retreat to or depend on?
There've been a few restaurants that do like, kind of traditional English roast. That's always fun. We've actually found a really amazing Texas barbecue place, which is very random. So that kind of gets me my Texas fix. And we found a couple of really nice Tex-Mex places as well. I mean, the problem with British food is there isn't really that much that's sort of properly British, if you know what I mean. But there's not a kind of maybe fish and chips, which I don't really like. Curry, I guess we quite often go for curries, but having lived in so many different places now, we have different ideas of what curry for me isn't really a home thing anymore. It reminds me of other places. So
wow.
So yeah, and then I guess, I mean, no, there's nowhere really that reminds me that much of home, like architecturally or nature wise. Like Singapore just couldn't be more different, really.
Yeah, understandable. All right, do you have time for 2 more questions, or
I've got loads of time today.
Okay, perfect. Let's do Grant had one recently. How does one narrow down their skills, their working professional skills, in order to continually live a nomadic lifestyle?
I guess it depends how nomadic you want to be, really. So the sort of different categories of international life that I described. If you want to be truly nomadic, and you don't, you could spend 3 to 6 months somewhere, you need something, I think, that's remote, that's online, or that's highly transferable. If you don't mind temping, and doing those sorts of general skills. But again, I mean, you can't just move to Singapore and kind of temp. You need a visa to be able to come in. and it's the same in many countries. It's the same in the Middle East, same in Australia. I would imagine it's the same in the UK. So if you do want to be truly nomadic, I think you need something that's online. If you are more like us and you kind of want to move every 2 to 4 years, I guess there's a couple of ways. Mostly, I would say you either find the thing that you love and you just get super specialized in that, or you look at the places that you want to live, and you kind of look for commonalities of those professions, or that might be specialized in those countries, and that can also help direct you.
Yes.
Is that good?
Yeah, great ideas. Thank you for that. I think Grant is still here, but that's really important. I think also a good way would be to look at your skills now and learning how to transfer them to other roles, right? If you can't, especially if you want to work online, but learning how to sell yourself. I know, a lot of us like learning how to sell yourself into other professions, because a lot of skills are incredibly transferable. So I think that's also something. Yeah. Mm-hmm. All right, let's thank you, Emma. One more awesome question. This is from Delisa or Delissa. I'm sorry if I don't know how to pronounce your name. How much traveling do you find yourself doing outside of the place you've settled and are living? Delisa loves to travel innately, so she considers where to base herself out of, based on that, and accessibility to travel other places is incredibly important as well.
So important for me. Probably the most important thing for us when we look at a location is what the potential is for travel. We were lucky. I think we made it out of Singapore 3 times before we locked down, which isn't bad in 6 months. The amazing thing about living in Southeast Asia is that they've got all these low-cost airlines, so it's incredibly easy and cheap to just go away for the weekend. It was harder in the Middle East because of the blockade, we were really restricted to Qatar Airways, and they just the flights were so expensive that it really made a long weekend was quite cost prohibitive. So we ended up spending more money on sort of longer trips. The great thing about living in the Middle East is that they have Eid and lots of holidays that you can kind of tack onto that are in addition to the vacation time that you get through work. So we were actually able to travel a lot then too. We were traveling right up until COVID started. We were traveling every 6 to 8 weeks, I would say, for at least 4 or 5 days.
Oh, that's amazing.
It was great. It was so great. I miss it so much. Oh.
Well, hopefully, things will start getting better. I feel like there's some hope, but it takes time and we want to keep safe. So exactly. Thank you, Emma, for sharing so much of your expertise.
Thank you for having me.
Of course, we always love having you. Come back every week. Let's do a part 2. Everyone, I dropped Emma's contact information in the chat. So you may want to scroll up a little bit. I will go ahead and drop it again in the chat. Please give Emma a follow or send her a note and say thank you. She does this for the love of the community and being able to share her knowledge. So to support her, let's just, follow her on whatever social media platforms you have and check out her website. She has so much information. She's a travel writer, and she's just been everywhere, as you heard and witnessed from today's presentation. So thank you so much, Emma. It's always a pleasure having you on and learning from your experiences. Like I said, this was an emotional presentation for me because I had was listening and thinking of my own experiences, and the chat was just filled with so many great stories and genuinely curious questions. So thanks again.
Well, thank you for having me, and thank you for hosting, and also to TNN, who very much changed my pandemic experience because of all the virtual events that I was able to attend. And there's very little to be grateful about during the pandemic, but this is 100% one of them. It's such a wonderful community.
I fully agree with you. So if you're here for the first time, you heard it from Emma and myself, like this community has truly changed my life as well. It was witnessed by Emma coming back 3 times and presenting and you know, sharing all this with us, and me loving hosting these events. So I'm just going to throw up some closing slides. I'm not going to throw up some closing slides. I'm going to throw them onto the screen so we can read them. Just a few more announcements to close the event out, everyone. Thank you for staying a little bit after the hour, Emma. Thank you, everyone who is still here.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
So if you head to thenomadicnetwork.com/events, you'll see our events pretty much for the next 2-3 months lined up. Like I said, we have happy hours almost every week. You don't have to live in that region at all to join the happy hours. Next week, we have Jason Robinson coming on, the Overthinker's Guide to Going Nomadic for Beginner Traveler happy hours. I'm hosting California Travel Happy Hour next week. You'll see we still have Seattle and Midwest coming up, so that's exciting. Like I said, tomorrow's book club for April has been postponed, so we'll start back up again on May 5th with Rolf Potts. So you still have plenty of time to grab the book. Bookshop.org is our preferred book vendor. So go ahead and Google it and grab this book. So you can join our Nomadic Map Plus community. This is our new Patreon, if you will. We've moved off Patreon onto our own Nomadic Map Plus community where you get exclusive tips, advice, all these bullet points here. This is where you get the replays, personal stories, live Q&As, free signed books and guides, never before seen photos, Facebook group access where you can ask a lot of questions and meet other like-minded travelers, access to the courses as well. So members.nomadicmat.com. I also dropped that link in the chat. And it would not be the same if it was just Emma and myself. So thank you all for being here and bringing your amazing questions. Please reach out to Emma if you have anything else, and look out for the follow-up email. We'll be dropping a few links in there as well. So thank you, everyone. Hope to see you next time at the next Nomadic Network event. Take care. Thanks for all your cues.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. See you next time. Thank you all. See you soon. Bye.
What up?
Thank you so much, Emma.
It's all right. It was fun. It always is. It's such a nice community. It's really easy to present to these guys.
Yeah, they're always, like I said, genuinely